Chapter 16, Step 4. When we moved on from Step 3, we proceeded to merge as part of society again. In the reckoning of ourselves, we come to a place when we need to be aware of what impact our actions have had on others. Our substance abuse was the outside layer while the core of our addiction remained below the surface. We need to see the full impact that our addictions had on our lives. I stress the importance of doing a fourth step because without taking this step, an analogy might be buying a car with a faulty engine. What keeps our recovery working is gaining a clear perspective of what our life experience has created in our lives. When we look in a mirror, the image we see is what we would like to believe about ourselves. A rigorously honest view of our actions gives us the tools that will sustain this new vehicle of recovery in our lives for the years to come. We become willing to bring light to the darkened halls of our past. We have hid our addictions and pushed responsibility for our actions back into the closets of our mind. We need to bring light to these experiences through pen to paper. An effective fourth step guide has been designed for your benefit to use at www.treatmentguide4u.com. That's www.treatmentguide4u.com. The term moral inventory tends to scare people into thinking that they are being judged. It is simply an inventory of our character, both assets and liabilities. We are able to see through a review of this inventory that fear is the basis for most of our actions. We further realize that our perspective of control through our roles in conditional relationships cause harm not only to ourselves, but to those we loved most in our lives. We looked at ways that we acted out as a controller, victim, or through our absence or unavailability. In most cases, we see the patterns early in life which continued through to the present. The focus is on relationships, especially the impact our addictions had on our family. This is not to set blame, but to be aware of our actions. Some of the patterns of choice have given us power in relationships with others, other than it being taken away. The effort of proceeding with this step brings the person to grasp the core of their fears to surface where they can be released. Addicts tend to hold on to resentments which prolong the pain of these relationships in their lives. We make an inventory of our resentments. We look at relationships with family, employer, jails, institutions, religion, legal, and people, places and things that we hold on to resentments towards. We examine the entire circumstance that brought on the resentment and then identify our part. We begin to see similarities where we played out the victim, controller, or isolator roles in our lives. As presented in the online fourth step worksheet, inventory the following 8 different behaviors which left emotional scars as they apply to you. Number 1. Resentments at the core that blocked our ability to move on beyond an experience in our past. Identify incidents that were the core to unresolved resentments. Number 2. Anger. Describe incidents where you processed anger inappropriately and it caused damage to others or yourself. Number 3. Grief or loss. Make a list of losses that you experienced throughout your life. Number 4. Self-centeredness is the core to addictive behaviors, including procrastination. List any incidents that had an effect on yourself or others.
Number 5. Harm to others. Describe incidences that your actions or lack of actions have caused harm to others.
Number 6. Harm to self. Describe any emotional or physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, or chronic pain that you have experienced. Number 7. Hopelessness and self-pity are instilled attitudes that block us from change. Describe an incident where hopelessness and self-pity have had an effect on your relationships with others and yourself. Number 8. Fear is the core to most character defects. Describe incidents where your fear affected your decision-making skills. There are many different types of fourth step inventories. To make it a thorough process, we suggest you review the areas in your life where you interact in relationships, which is as follows. Identify where I may have acted out as a controller manager role, where my control issues have been verbally, physically, or emotionally abusive. Identifying where I was in the victim role and I was subject to verbal, physical, or emotional abuse. Also identifying patterns in which I was a victim of circumstances, which may have occurred in my life, leaving unresolved trauma. Once reviewing these areas, sit down and write out your inventory based on the 8 questions presented in the 4-step worksheets. Relationships with family. In what ways have I been in a pattern of a victim, controller, or isolator in my relationships with family, or in what ways have I disassociated or isolated myself in my responsibilities in being part of my family? In relationships with acquaintances and friends. Is my relationship with old and new friends either close or casual, acting on a pattern of a victim, controller, or isolator? Relationship to physical needs. Have I been destructive in taking care of my health? Have I neglected my nutritional needs and diet, my exercise, or my dental and medical needs? Relationships based on society. Is our sense of identity based on our victim, controller, or isolation from relationships within society, on the job, in school, or involvement with probation or the criminal system? Have I intimidated people or been the victim of intimidation? Do I have prejudices or single out individuals due to their race, color, their skin, age, sexual preference, weight, religious beliefs, or gender? Have I been open to learning about my own cultural traditions that were part of my heritage? Relationships in public. Is our sense of identity based on our victim, controller, or isolation from interactions with others in public areas, such as restaurants, bars, grocery stores, movie theaters, or on the road, through road rage or reckless driving? Relationships based on spirituality. Is our sense of identity in context to our spiritual beliefs and practices? Have I accused others of being morally wrong because of their religious beliefs are not the same as our own? Are we in a victim pattern because of our religious upbringing, feeling guilty about our actions and judging ourselves accordingly, or relying on a spiritual guide for approval for any good feelings we have about ourselves? Have I withdrawn from those religious, spiritual ties out of avoidance of unresolved conflict? Relationships based on sexuality. Is our sense of identity in our victim, controller, or isolator relationships related to our sexual behavior? This may be through our pursuit of a sexual partner and any involvement in any sexual relationships, with our consent or through violation. It depends on the ability to provide for our partner's needs and their willingness to provide for ours. Have I dismissed our sexual needs by not pursuing any sexual relationships due to unresolved conflicts? On a side note, our sexuality is an important topic to address in this inventory. In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a reference to the need for the alcoholic to do a total sexual overhaul of their values in that area. That was a pretty big statement to make in the early 1930s. There was a reason for the authors at that time to recognize human sexuality being a significant issue to address in recovery. We have difficulty even talking about it without using some type of defensive humor to cut through the insecurity. Perhaps it was due to the fact that we, as humans, are prone to being monogamous with one partner. The importance is sharing these sensitive needs with one individual, our partner. I once heard a presentation by Pat Carnes, who is a well-known psychologist and has written several books on human sexuality. He presented that even a paraplegic can have a satisfied sense of their sexuality if they are able to communicate and receive their sexual needs from their partner and provide for their partner's needs. So our sexuality and sexual needs can be fulfilled if we have the ability to communicate about them. In order to communicate about these needs, we must have 3 things in the relationship: trust, communication, and intimacy. The 3 things which are lost in a relationship with the addict are trust, communication, and intimacy. I am not saying that practicing addict does not get their sexual needs met, but often they are not able to communicate about their sexual needs with their partner. Obviously, alcoholics and addicts have had sex, so how do they communicate about their needs? Often what happens is that one person becomes the provider for the sexual needs and the other the receiver. In this way, there is no need to discuss or make a decision about the functioning in their sexual activity. Yes, women tend to more often be the provider for their partner's sexual needs in a heterosexual relationship. Often the lack of communication in our sexual relationship is recognized as a lack of foreplay. This absence of emotional contact with their partner triggers a need for some type of arousal, often through fantasy. We then become stimulated through a sexual fantasy, sometimes even with someone else at another time, yet we are in bed with our partner having sex with them. In order for the addict to build communication, trust must be acquired through our partners seeing our willingness to halt our addictions and establish sincerity in building our relationship with them. In the process of building a relationship with our partner, we may be involved in couples counseling or using other community resources such as 12-step meetings and sponsors. As we build our communication about our needs and our relationships, we begin to build intimacy with our partner again. Intimacy is a place where we can talk about our vulnerable emotions, which allows us to talk about our sexual needs with our partner. When we get to the point of beginning to define our sexual needs in the relationship, which we haven't previously discussed with our partner, a great deal of conflict can come up in us. If I express my needs to my partner for whom I have been the provider, questioning if they will acknowledge my needs is a very sensitive issue. For the one who has received those sexual needs, they may have fear in being more directly involved with a sexual interaction with another person providing for their needs. It is a real-time relationship in the present with our partner in which they are not in control. For the person who has been providing for their partner's needs, to communicate what their sexual needs are could be a very vulnerable state for them. Their partner could reject their request. We have moved from a position of a conditional sexual relationship with our partner to an unconditional sexual relationship, which can fulfill both partners' needs. In the beginning, it may cause a breakdown in their arousal. In time, it becomes incredibly satisfying because we are in a relationship in the here and now with our partners, fulfilling their sexual needs along with our own. Our actual time of having a sexual encounter is trivial to the amount of time we engage in a relationship with our partner. Providing for our partner's sexual needs and our own in the present moment will help fortify our commitment to our relationship in other areas. We also need to review our pursuit of or prior involvement in sexual relationships with others. In some cases, we may have acted out as an aggressor in a sexual relationship, fulfilling our external appetite in objectifying our partner as a trophy. Through seduction and intercourse with them, we have attained something of value. Then, we quickly lose interest in them and pursue the next relationship. In pursuing another relationship, we take energy away from our partner that we would have normally have provided to them. This is a common character defect. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence. When we put our energy into a fantasy relationship with another person, it may develop into getting my needs met partially from that person, but I should be getting them met by my partner. This also can be seen in the obsessive use of pornography. This is destructive when it takes away from elements in our life. By doing so, it undermines our relationship with our significant other. One needs to ask, is it taking away and providing for a satisfying sexual relationship with my partner? Is fantasy causing me to distance myself from my partner? These questions must be asked in the fourth step to come to a full understanding of the effect on our lives. If we don't face our actions here, we will not be able to plot a healthy course in our present relationship or future relationships. There are those who have shut down their sexual needs, becoming neutral in their relationships with others. It is important for these individuals to discuss how this impacted their ability to develop intimacy in their lives. We are sexual beings, and through our interactions with others, we learn to develop sexual behavior. To deny one's sexual needs can be a form of self-destructive behavior for the recovering addict. This is an area necessary to inventory for healing to continue. It is also important to assess where we have been sexually abused and violated by others, being strangers or someone we know. It is important to face this part of our inventory with an open mind. Without this effort to bring light into the emotional wounds, we will continue to leave part of our spirit locked behind the prison. It isn't our penance to live in the dark, but rather our need to nurture and heal the part of ourselves that was violated. These issues are emotional scars which need to be identified and brought to the surface. It wasn't our fault for the abuse. We were victims, and we as guardians of our spirit have a need to bring love and care to the most fragile part of our being. This topic matter is not just for heterosexual individuals, but also for homosexual individuals in developing a healthy sense of their own identity. I refrain to mention examples that occurred in the gay community only because of my lack of expertise in the area. Creating an attitude of willingness isn't enough. It is through heartfelt emotion that we have taken on the effort to working on the prior steps leading up to the autobiography and moral inventory. Having the emotional awareness that my past is a roadmap of my life experience, and facing this with pen to paper is at hand. I can't say it's the only way to recovery. Procrastination hinders a lot of our commitment to do this step. I once was sponsoring a doctor in recovery, and I was on him about doing his 4-step inventory for 4 months. I finally told him I wanted him to write out a 4th step on the patterns of procrastination in his life. He then followed through, which started the process of looking into his past. I have often seen people who have never completed the 4th step lack the motivation to follow through with the remaining steps. Most of us fear what lies in the past, yet we've been living with the content inside of us our entire lives. It's true that most people perceive the 4th step as a huge catapult in recovery, but still, we fear that facing ourselves will bring about a horrid experience. I knew a person who felt this way finally just sit down and do his 4th step. After finishing, he reported the person he discovered inside was a beautiful child of God who deserved a second chance. This 4th step is a powerful tool which looks through a window of our past, with tools that assist us in viewing our experience. As it was, without judgment, our attitude going into writing out a 4th step is important to acknowledge as we start this process. The first time I did a 4th step, I was writing it out with reservations because of my fear-based reaction to compliance. I was in legal trouble and needed to complete what was required from me at the inpatient facility I was in. I thought if I sounded good enough, I would pass the requirements for treatment. But my sincerity wasn't there, even though the content of what I was writing probably would have been adequate for most people. It wasn't really me who I was writing about. So, it's important to recognize who I am doing this for, and be able to identify what internal motivators I have to continue with my recovery before doing the list. Having a private, safe place to write out your 4th step is important. This is a private thing, so be sure to give yourself a place of solitude where you can do it. You need that safe haven so that you can concentrate at the task at hand. I've suggested for recovering addicts to set up an appointment a week or 2 from the time they started writing to present to their sponsor, counselor, or clergy. This time limit usually sets the process in motion. You must be prepared before starting such an important task. If you are in some sort of crisis, financial or emotional, it is not the time to begin a 4th step. Be calm. Have a binder or journal so you can keep everything together. Work chronologically. It is difficult to take on a task that you know will probably trigger negative feelings about yourself. So it is common to experience some sort of anxiety or mild depression in writing out your life experience. Don't feel like you're the only one experiencing this reaction. Keep in mind that it's important not only to write about our negative experiences, but also positive ones. Not just our character defects, but our character assets as well. People in recovery tend to focus on one aspect of their personality. This is a full inventory. It is tough to look at positives when you're only looking at the negatives. In a moral inventory, we tend to judge ourselves sharply. But that sharp criticism isn't what we're after in this 4th step. What we need now is an objective view of ourselves at this stage of awareness in our lives. Making sponsors, mentors, and others in recovery aware that we're working on a fourth step solidifies our commitment to do it. It also gives you a backup support system if you need to talk about some of the feelings which are being triggered. It is important to keep the material you are writing in a private and secure place. I once had a client in an inpatient facility work on his fourth step in his room. His wife came to visit him and read the work on his nightstand. This spurred a lot of problems in their relationship. The purpose of the initial inventory is to write about our lives as we see it today. There will be other opportunities to write on this subject in the future when we have gained more insight into ourselves. Right now, give yourself time. You don't have to write it out all at once. A week or two is a good frame. That is enough time to write out a thorough account. Remember, after beginning a fourth step, other issues could arise. This process of writing isn't something we do every day. It is there for the occasions when we feel we need to review our lives. It may be necessary to repeat it after a relapse, a divorce, or some life-changing event. I have written a fourth step about every 7 years in my life and recovery in the past 35 years. A person is ready to write out a first step when a past event or experience is preventing them from living in the here and now. In doing so, there is a tremendous benefit. Once I had heard that a Persian rug is woven with one thread throughout the entire weave. The thread of our life experience is our lifeline. Through writing out our experience, we weave our story with our motives and our intent alongside our actions. We see how often fear was the basis for certain character defects, and that a lot of choices we made in our lives were fear-based. This personal realization gives us the fortitude to break free from some of these patterns in our lives. Writing out a fourth step is like fasting for a period of time. I may be uncomfortable in the process, but is releasing toxins from my body. Often I've heard people having unpleasant feelings and having almost flu-like symptoms when writing it out. This is why it's important to have a sponsor or accountability partner available for support. Feeling badly doesn't mean that this is a bad experience, but one that reflects a lot of emotion which we have held inside and are becoming aware. I remember a similar situation in a training I received on interferon, which was prescribed for hepatitis C carriers. They reported flu-like symptoms that left them feeling poorly. It was explained that the flu-like symptoms was the person's immune system kicking in, fighting the disease back. Don't forget to reread the fourth step often. Rereading may trigger other memories that you have been withholding. Keep a copy of the fourth step handy for assistance in working on step 6 and step 8. Remember this: only when I feel in my gut that this step is an open portrayal of who I have been, is it time to move on to the next step.